All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Helms. I'm with New Readers Press, and I'm happy you're able to join us today. This is our Digital Equity and Inclusion three-part webinar series. Today, the topic is leveraging digital equity and inclusion for funding. You'll have a chance to learn more about federal funding opportunities and how to position your organization as a valuable partner for the expansion of digital equity and inclusion. With us today, we have Angela Harris. Angela is the author of the Computers One Click at a Time workbook and the chief content developer of the Computers One Click at a Time online curricula. She spent nearly 2 decades providing technical assistance to government agencies, institutions of higher education, nonprofits, and small businesses. Also with us and presenting today is Gwenn Weaver, who serves on the boards of the Durham Literacy Center and the National Coalition for Literacy, and the steering committees of Digital Durham and the Open Door Collective. She advises the North Carolina Digital Equity and Inclusion Collaborative. She serves as a broadband program specialist and a federal program officer for the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, and staffed the Federal Digital Literacy Portal. Her bio goes on, and I hope you have had a chance to read about it. And Gwenn, I'll go ahead and stop and hand it over to you.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you very much. And you're right, the bio goes on and on. It's because I'm old. Don't worry about it. But anyway, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the part 2 of our webinar series. I do want to start, and I don't know how many of you were participants in the first session, but I'm going to start this off today by talking about, at least I think I am, if I can get this to move, there we go, what digital equity is. We went over a bunch of definitions in the first session. And again, I don't know how many of you actually, how many of you actually participated in that session, but we want to be sure that we are all working from the same page. So this definition of digital equity, which is was put together by the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, is the one on which much of the work that's now going on in the federal arena is based. It's a condition in which all individuals and community have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in society, democracy, and economy. That's our objective. That is extremely important to our students in the adult learning world. So the federal government recently has implemented a program called Internet for All. And Internet for All is the overview program, or the overview label for all of the activities that are going on. The ones we want to talk about today are the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, and within that, more specifically, the Digital Equity Act. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard about the Infrastructure Act. And within the Infrastructure Act, which includes all sorts of activities and lots and lots of funding for all sorts of things that are considered infrastructure, broadband is considered part of the infrastructure. And so the Internet for All, again, as I mentioned, is the umbrella for the broadband related programs. And there are basically 3 large pots of money under this $65 billion, although there are other smaller pots as well. The 3 we're going to talk about today are the first one is BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. This is a program that is primarily focused on broadband, on making sure that it becomes available in every community within the country. Some of you may already know this, many of you may not, that even though technically broadband is available in many communities, it's only technically available for a bunch of reasons. In some cases, it's because it's there, but it doesn't actually go to the dwelling, to the house. It's there, like wires are there, either hanging on the poles or underground, but it's not affordable for a lot of people. And then in many places, it just doesn't exist at all. So a big chunk of money is being invested in, and it's through the states, in making sure that broadband becomes available and is accessible in all communities in the country. The other part, though, that's much more important and much of greater interest to us, particularly in the adult literacy world, is the Digital Equity Act. The Digital Equity Act consists of three grant programs. Again, two of which are focused on states, one of which is focused on other entities, other organizations. So the Digital Equity Act, which is again part of the Infrastructure Act, is meant to include more people in the process to support digital inclusion and digital equity activities. The state digital equity planning grant program is the one that is currently exists, and it is money that is being granted to the states, and all 50 states and all of the territories are getting funding to do this. They have to create planning plans, actually digital equity plans, and explain how they are going to be sure that all of their citizens are able to access the internet and take advantage of the technology at a reasonable cost in a way that is useful and usable for those individuals and households. So they have to develop these plans in collaboration with the communities who are being served. And that's the first point that I want to make for our community, for the adult literacy community, and that is getting involved at the planning level. Because if we get involved at the planning level, then we are able to make our case and move forward to the second level of programs. The programs following the planning grants will be the capacity grant programs. Again, going to the states, but those are the programs where they tell you how you're going to implement, how they're going to implement the plan that they've created with the first round of grant funding. And so the implementation part is going to be very important to be sure that our organizations and our students are going to get what they should be getting and what they need from the state plan. And then the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program, which is the third component, is the program that's going to make $1.25 billion available over a 5-year period for the private sector, the public sector, and the not-for-profit sector to advance digital equity and to engage in digital inclusion activities. So at that level, individual organizations can also compete for some of the funding that's out there. But the reason we're talking about this today is because it's important for all of our organizations and our community as the adult literacy community to participate in the entire process, not to wait for the final phase of the program, not to wait for that third set of grant making, but rather to be involved and engaged at this level from the beginning with the planning. We all know that digital skills are going to be a critical element. They are a critical element of all aspects of life these days. We talked about that a little bit in the first session of this series, and the fact that people need digital skills. They need to be able to use technology for pretty much anything and everything, and that it is a lifelong learning process, and it's a continuous process. And in order for that to happen, again, we need to be involved and engaged in all of the digital equity work that's going on. So how do we do that? Well, a big part is going to be partnering and collaborating Because again, many of our organizations, while we may do digital literacy training, or we may, we probably in many instances, and particularly during the pandemic, we started trying to do everything. We helped our students get equipment, we helped them get hotspots and internet access, but no one organization can do everything all the time. So it's really important to find the partners in your community with whom you can work compatibly. And again, my colleague Angela is going to talk more about how to do this. You want to get a seat at the table. We talk about that a lot. Currently, the table is the state planning grant table, and that's where we really want to go. We also want to engage our community. We want to be sure that everyone is going to be involved. And again, the adult literacy world is frequently, and we all know this, not as engaged as it might be in many of the digital inclusion activities that go on. So some of the ways to do this, like I said, collaboration is really important. And you may not know where or how to get at least put your foot in the door to get involved in some of these digital inclusion activities. So I've listed here a couple of organizations that are good starting points for finding that information in your state or your locality. The first one, which is the federal organization, has on their website a map that you can click on and you can find, like who's the broadband office in your state, or what some of the organizations in your state or your locality are that are doing this work. And it's a good place to start to find out whom you can contact and how you can become engaged. Same thing with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance and with Shelby. Both of those are nonprofit organizations. NDIA is much more focused on digital equity and inclusion. Shelby is much more focused on the infrastructure issues. They intersect and they work together on digital equity issues as a whole. And so both of them are places to find organizations that are doing this work. For example, Shelby, because it's schools, health, and libraries, among their members has many school districts and local counties, libraries, and local libraries. Those are other places to go to find out who's engaged and involved in this work. And these are ways that you too can then become involved and engaged. I'll give you an example, which is me as an example. Because I'm involved with the state digital equity organization here in North Carolina, our state office, broadband office, which has a digital equity manager, has asked the Digital Equity Collaborative to help the state write their plan. And so we are able to be direct participants in the activity. And because I am so involved with adult learning, I'm able to bring the message that adult learning and adult literacy is a critical consideration for building that state digital equity plan. So I say all of that to say that I encourage you to do this work and to get involved. And the way to get involved is going to be explained to you by Miss Angela Harris. So Angela, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you.
Wonderful. So I am then going to share my screen. Okay, so thank you, Gwen. So good morning, everyone. Good morning to some of you. Good afternoon to others, depending upon where you are. So what I'm going to do is just basically underscore some important action items. Gwen has already mentioned and emphasized the importance of not waiting, but basically taking action now. She is basically advocating and encouraging all of us to get involved at the planning level, which is actually taking place now. And so what I'm going to do is just to highlight some action steps that can help you build upon this basically stance of not waiting, but moving forward now to make sure that you have that seat at the table. So I'm going to highlight some things you can do internally as well as externally. And let's just look at initially who is impacted by the digital divide. So these were things to ponder that were mentioned in the discussion last week that Gwenn highlighted. And she also mentioned what can your organization do and how can you be successful. So I'm going to hopefully provide at least a few answers to some of these questions that maybe you can internalize and put into action for your own organization. So the good thing is, in terms of who is impacted by the digital divide, our policymakers have already delineated, they've already described pretty much the impacted populations. So here I have a list of priority populations, and you'll notice that first bullet point there is individuals with a language barrier. So individuals with a language barrier not only includes individuals who have demonstrated maybe low levels of literacy, but also English language learners, who I know is the customer base and basically comprises a lot of the individuals that you all actually serve. So also low-income households, depending upon where you are, but generally speaking, a lot of the solicitations that I've seen define low-income households as 150% of the federal poverty level or below, and that could change based on a given area that you're in, or maybe some census tract data. So just keep that in mind. Individuals in rural areas, that's another sort of targeted population. Our aging residents, as well as incarcerated or second chance individuals or justice involved individuals. And so again, these are underrepresented and underserved groups. So within this group, there's also individuals with disabilities, and then members of racial and ethnic minorities. So keep in mind that this list is by no means exhaustive. There could be other entities that fall under this umbrella, but just generally speaking, based on some of the things that we've seen and some of the solicitations that have already come out, these are some of the priority populations to keep in mind. So what can your organization do? So internally, this is a good time as you're trying to basically get involved at the planning level and have that seat at the table, is to basically, I like to say, conduct an organizational assessment. So basically assess your organization. What are you doing now that already works, okay? Look at your track record. What has been your outcomes? What has been the impact in your community? Be able to not only articulate these things, but write them down. It doesn't have to be something formal where you have a consultant, but basically these are things that you need to know, because this is part of your competency. And I'm going to talk about how you utilize that competency to get that seat at the table that we've been talking about. But what are your resources? What are your stakeholder strengths? So how many volunteers do you have? How many volunteers do you have? Are you able with those volunteers to meet your current goals? Can you layer on another level of deliverables to maybe participate in digital equity, expanding digital equity and inclusion? And if so, will you need more volunteers? Do you have a relationship with academia where you have students who volunteer on a normal basis? What about your board members? What relationships do they have? What relationships do you have in your community? What about your students that you serve, the adult literacy individuals that you serve? How many are you serving? So basically, this is just a way of looking at your track record, looking at what you do well, the resources you have, the relationships you have, the expertise you have within your organizations, with your own staff that you have. So looking at those stakeholder strengths, but then also being honest about challenges that need to be addressed, because you don't want to be overstretched. You want to have a dose of realism about what you can do and maybe what you can't do. And then that's going to help you as you begin to think about these collaborations, because then you're going to realize, okay, that's not something that we do well, that's a gap. Maybe there's a partner that can fill that gap or void, so that collectively we can really have impact as we help to expand digital equity and inclusion in the community. Now, externally, So I have check marks here because you all those of you who are here, those of you who will be viewing this presentation, you're already taking steps in this direction of understanding the language of digital equity. So Gwenn has done a great job with the foundation of giving us some of those concepts like digital inclusion, digital equity, digital divide, so that we can become familiar with some of the jargon that's included in some of these solicitations. And when I say solicitations, I'm talking about the requests, the funding announcements, the requests for proposals, sort of the language and the jargon. But you're also going to get, at the end of the series, a resource sheet that's going to share some resources and some articles, because there's been a lot written already. And so it doesn't hurt to just basically, in terms of preparedness, to access this information so that you're informed about what's going on in the space if you're not already. And then another check mark is here for identifying funding sources, because Gwenn has shared with you some of the federal funding sources, but again, that list is not exhaustive. I mean, you'd be surprised regarding some other entities that are also doing this type of work, and they need partners such as yourselves. So again, just keep in mind that this is not limited. And then you want to seek new or non-traditional community partnerships. And this is where you're going to really have to step out of your comfort zone. Okay, you're going to have to basically get outside of your comfort zone. And so this is really important. And I want to share with you, when I think about non-traditional or community partnerships, I think about coalition building. And I just want to share a definition that I sort of have contextualized for some of the work that we do. And if you think about assembling a mix of competencies that can coalesce around a shared goal. So in this case, the goal of closing the digital divide, and basically deliver coordinated, meaningful outcomes for the good of humanity. And so this coordination requires some management, okay? And meaningful, there has to be meaningful outcomes. And a lot of times these outcomes are measured, whether it's qualitatively or quantitatively, but this is for the good, to help elevate adult learners, to help them flourish and continue to thrive. So when you are thinking about, reaching out to unlikely partners or partners that you haven't considered before, just think about this definition of coalition building. And then possible collaborators. So there are a lot of collaborators here. Again, this list is not exhaustive, but just keep this in mind when you're thinking about, okay, here are some things that you do well. Who might we reach out to? You could reach out to your local library. You could reach out to the local government, churches, other nonprofits, again, colleges, workforce development boards. There might be businesses in the community, whether large or small, that could help maybe with workforce development. Maybe they have some needs. So if you're thinking about digital skills training, you could collaborate with them to figure out what their needs are. There might be some ed tech companies or other adult ed content providers that can help you maybe with some tools that could make, if you're deciding to deliver training, to help make that better. And so I will give you a personal experience that involves my organization. So last year, there was a solicitation that came out, and I actually reached out to a college in Boston that was serving a minority serving institution that was serving primarily a Latinx, a Hispanic population, and reached out to an HBCU in this area and here in North Carolina, which is where I am, that's considered an anchor institution. Now, the college in Boston happened to be a customer, but the HBCU here in North Carolina, I did not know. So that was a cold call that I made. And we actually ended up collaborating to submit a proposal that was based on a federal solicitation. So again, think about what you do well, who these potential collaborators are as you're doing your research and your homework, and then how can you be successful? So it's very important that you articulate your value proposition. And so I had to do that on behalf of my organization when I was reaching out to, again, the minority serving institution in Boston, as well as the HBCU, who I did not have a relationship with. And in terms of, I want you to think about what you are bringing to the table. So we've talked about those priority populations. I'm sure many of you are serving at least one and maybe several of those entities that were listed. And then think about your experience. So this is where your track record comes into place. And so think about your track record, think about impact in your community. Think about, again, those things that many of you might even have in an annual report. You might already have it. So if you put this equation together, it's just a matter, in many instances, just looking at what you already have. So it's not doing anything extra. It's just basically defining that and being able to articulate it in a clear way. And then linking what you already do to your capability as a partner for digital equity and inclusion expansion. And these are just some of the activities that you might think about that might relate to some of the work that needs to get done in order to expand digital equity. And so again, literacy services, which again, a lot of you are familiar with. Maybe you might do device lending or device distribution, digital skills training. Maybe you might launch a digital navigator program. Maybe you'll assist with data collection because you're already collecting data. You're already doing a needs assessment about what your students, what your adult learners need. Maybe you might provide some technical support because guess what? Once individuals are trained, they might need the support. They might run into difficulties and they need to be able to contact someone that can help them navigate and troubleshoot some of those problems. And then you might just be a local convener. So these are just some things to think about. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, what I just mentioned, but it's to help you do what I want to leave you with is just have that elevator speech. So when you are reaching out to potential partners, and again, the elevator speech, just for those of you who don't know, 30 to 45 seconds, nothing longer, but just think about the length of or how long it would take you in an elevator. So if you're meeting with someone, being able to articulate that unique value proposition, which I just gave you sort of this formula, simple formula for, and there are templates on the internet. And I just, again, this is just something, a way that how I think about it, and I hope it's helpful for you. But having that unique value proposition, and don't forget a call to action. So as you're relaying your experience, the population that you serve and how it might relate to closing the digital divide, when you're making that phone call or doing that email or leaving that voicemail, just remember to say, how can we help you based on everything that we've done? Let's talk, let's get together. Have that call to action so that someone will call you back. Let's talk soon. Look forward to having that call to action so that someone will actually return the call and will see that what you're presenting is valuable enough for them basically to connect with you so that you do in fact get that seat at the table. So at this time, I'm going to hand it back over to Dan in case there are any questions. I think we have a couple of minutes. And again, thank you all for attending, and we welcome any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Angela. And there was a question, but I think Gwen just answered it. It was about focusing. Should we focus on just one population for best results? Gwen has typed in a response. So what I will say, since we're at the bottom of the hour here, is that number one, I want to thank Gwenn Weaver and Angela Harris for presenting today. I want to remind you, as I did in chat, that this Thursday, the 17th, again at the same time, same place, there will be part 3 of this webinar series, Sustainability Through Programming, where you can discover digital skills training solutions offered by New Readers Press to help you sustain your programmatic activities. So if I'll keep watching for other questions, but I don't see any at this time. So on behalf of New Readers Press, thank you for joining us today, for taking a look at the important aspects of building a more equitable digital landscape. We look forward to being with you at the same time on Thursday for part 3 of this series. Any other questions?